The Whispering Pines subdivision was a monument to the American obsession with control disguised as community. Gated entrance, uniform mailboxes, HOA meetings that felt like court proceedings. Sarah Chen had lived here for 6 years without incident, paying her dues, keeping her lawn at exactly 2.5 inches, the covenant specification, and largely keeping to herself. She was a project manager for a commercial construction firm, long hours, minimal complaint, maximum results. Her modest split-level home was her refuge, not her status symbol. This was precisely the problem. "Mrs. Chen," the voice came from behind her as she carried a recycling bin to the curb on a Tuesday morning. "A moment, please." Sarah turned to see Victoria Ashford gliding down the sidewalk like a yacht in motion, all flowing white linen, oversized sunglasses, and the particular kind of determination that comes from spending 2 hours selecting an outfit to pick up coffee. At 56, Victoria had aged like she was personally suing time itself. Facelift precision, hair color that didn't exist in nature, a body maintained with religious devotion at the country club gym. "Morning, Victoria." Sarah set the bin down. Victoria didn't do casual interactions. There was always an agenda. "Yes, well, morning or not, we need to address the situation developing in your yard." Victoria's voice had the brittle quality of ice about to crack. "The shed." "The shed I built 10 years ago, that shed." Sarah felt a smile forming, the defensive kind she didn't want to wear. "The one that violates Section 4.2 of your property covenant regarding accessory structure placement. It's visible from Maple Street, which creates a visual disturbance that impacts our community standards." "Victoria, that shed is 20 feet back from my property line. You can barely see it unless you're literally standing in my yard." "And yet," Victoria produced her phone like a weapon. On screen, a photo of Sarah's modest garden shed, cherry red with weathered trim, taken from the street at a low angle specifically designed to make it look as intrusive as possible. "This was submitted to the HOA board 3 weeks ago. We voted. The structure needs to be removed or you'll incur a fine of $50 per day until compliance." Sarah's jaw tightened. "Who submitted it?" Victoria's smile was small, satisfied. "The board votes anonymously." "That's not, Victoria. We both know you're on the architectural committee. Did you?" "The board has spoken, Mrs. Chen. You have 30 days. Victoria turned, her white linen trailing like she was royalty departing a lesser court. "I'm sure you'll do the right thing." The right thing? Sarah watched her leave, that phrase settling like sediment in her chest. The right thing. The shed had held her father's tools, his woodworking equipment, his sander, his vise. He died 4 years ago. She hadn't had the heart to throw any of it away, so she'd kept it all in that shed, occasionally moving things around, pretending she'd organize it someday. The right thing would be to comply, remove the shed, put the tools in storage, move on. But Sarah had a complicated relationship with obedience to arbitrary authority. She called an attorney friend that evening. His answer was swift and depressing. The HOA had contractual authority to enforce aesthetic standards. The covenant had been signed when she bought the property. If she didn't comply, the fines would accumulate. If she still didn't pay after 6 months, they could place a lien on her house. It was legal. It was constitutional. It was the system working exactly as intended. "Fight it at a board meeting," the attorney suggested. "Request an appeal, make your case in person." The HOA held meetings the second Tuesday of each month. Sarah attended the next one in person, walking into the community center's small conference room to find 23 other residents scattered across folding chairs. Victoria sat at the head table, flanked by 2 other board members. Derek Hayes, who managed a hedge fund and constantly talked about optimizing community value, and Margaret Wu, who mostly seemed afraid and looked like she was attending under duress. The meeting agenda was dense with bureaucratic flourishes, landscaper licensing approvals, a proposal to install decorative fencing along the east boundary, a complaint about a resident leaving their trash bin visible from the street for more than 8 hours on pickup day. Then, regarding the unauthorized accessory structure on Willowbrook Lane, Mrs. Chen. Sarah had prepared. She'd brought photographs showing other sheds in the neighborhood, at least 4 that she could see from public streets. She had documentation that the shed's placement was approved by the county when she built it. She had receipts showing property tax paid in full for the land it occupied. "The shed was placed according to county regulations," Sarah said, standing to address the table. "I've also documented 4 other structures in this neighborhood that are similarly positioned, and none of those residents have received violation notices. I'm requesting either equal enforcement across all properties or reconsideration of this specific violation." Derek Hayes didn't look up from his phone. Victoria smiled. Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "The board has already voted," Victoria said. "Unless you're requesting a formal appeal with new information, the decision stands." "I just showed you the new information." "Photos of other properties aren't new information regarding your violation." Victoria's tone was pleasant, absolute. "The structural remains in violation, 30 days. Sarah sat down. Around her, other residents avoided eye contact. She realized then that no one was going to argue her case. No one was going to say, "This doesn't seem fair." The silence was institutional. The system worked on compliance, not justice, and compliance meant not making waves. When she left the meeting, Margaret Wu caught up with her in the parking lot. "Hey, I'm sorry about that." Margaret was 50-ish, warm-looking, tired. "For what it's worth, I voted to dismiss the violation. Victoria and Derek overruled me." "Why?" Sarah asked. Margaret glanced back at the community center, then lowered her voice. "Victoria has it out for you. I don't know why exactly, but she does. She's been collecting photos of your property for months. She mentioned once that your casual aesthetic was dragging down the market value of her neighborhood." That's a quote. Sarah felt something shift in her chest. Not anger, not yet. Something darker and more strategic. "Do you know who filed the original complaint?" Margaret shook her head. "Board votes are anonymous, but Victoria's been on the architectural committee for 4 years. She signs off on most complaints before they even reach us." That night, Sarah sat in her home office, laptop glowing. She pulled up the county record system, scrolling through neighborhood properties. The Ashford residence, approximately 8,500 square feet on a quarter-acre lot. Purchased 2018 for $1.2 million. Most recent assessed value, $950,000. The neighborhood had been gentrifying upward for a decade, then suddenly stopped. Homes were selling slower. Values had plateaued. She scrolled through the architectural violations documented in the HOA records over the past 2 years. 42 violations filed, 28 by the architectural committee. 16 of those 15 were directed at the same target: Sarah's property or properties owned by people like her, modest, quiet, not participating in the country club's social orbit. Then Sarah found it. 5 days after Victoria's violation notice went out, Victoria had filed for an addition to her own home, a 600-square-foot pool house. The proposal included a covered lanai, a sauna, marble detailing, and an estimated cost of $240,000. According to the architectural committee's notes, the project had been pre-approved with enthusiasm. The lanai would be visible from Maple Street, the exact same street from which Victoria had photographed Sarah's shed. The 30-day deadline came and went. Sarah didn't remove the shed. Instead, she waited for the first $50 fine to appear in her mailbox. It arrived on a Wednesday, printed on official HOA letterhead, sealed in an envelope with her name typed with clinical precision. $50 unauthorized structure violation date, day 31. She didn't pay it. Another arrived the following week, then another. Sarah created a folder labeled fines and filed them methodically. By month 3, she owed $4,800. By month 4, $6,800. She could have paid it easily, the money wasn't an issue, but paying it would have been acquiescence. It would have meant accepting that Victoria Ashford got to decide what Sarah could keep on her own property. That compliance was the only option, that the system worked as intended because it was designed to crush people who pushed back. Victoria noticed. She began appearing on Sarah's street. In the mornings, photographing the shed from different angles. In the afternoons, making formal complaints about Sarah's car being parked in her driveway, violation. Not in garage, about dead leaves in her gutters, violation. Exterior maintenance, about her mailbox post being slightly faded, violation. Fixture aesthetics. Each complaint generated a new fine. Each fine went unpaid. The HOA board meetings became theater. Sarah attended everyone, watching Margaret Wu's growing discomfort, watching Derek Hayes become increasingly hostile, watching Victoria orchestrate each violation with the precision of a conductor leading an orchestra toward crescendo. "Mrs. Chen continues to demonstrate a pattern of noncompliance," Victoria announced at the May meeting, now carrying a leather portfolio. "I have 17 documented violations since March. The cumulative fines total $12,150. Don't most of these seem minor?" Margaret ventured weakly. No violation is minor when it represents a rejection of community standards, Victoria replied. Mrs. Chen is making a statement that the rules don't apply to her. Unless we enforce equitably and absolutely, the entire fabric of our community governance collapses. Sarah wanted to laugh. The entire fabric. The woman was using language typically reserved for national security to discuss a mailbox post. What Sarah didn't anticipate was Victoria's next move. The letter arrived in June, delivered by a process server Sarah had to sign for. It was formal, legal, and devastating in its efficiency. The HOA was initiating an enforcement action. If cumulative fines and violations weren't brought into compliance within 60 days, the board was authorized under Section 9.4 of the Master Deed to place a lien on Sarah's property. The lien would accrue interest. It would appear on her credit report. If Sarah later sought to sell or refinance, the lien would need to be cleared. The HOA had already made arrangements with its counsel, costs to be billed to Sarah. Sarah's hands shook as she read it. This wasn't about a shed anymore. This was about leverage. Victoria had found the nuclear button and pressed it. She called her attorney again. His voice was different this time, not sympathetic but cautious. This is legal, he confirmed. Aggressive but legal. The HOA has lien authority in this state for unpaid assessments and fines. Here's what I recommend: comply, remove the shed, pay the fines. I know it feels unjust, but lien litigation is expensive and unpredictable. What if I don't? Then you're looking at potentially losing your home. That's not hyperbole. If the lien accrues enough and you can't pay and you go to sell, the lien takes priority. You could walk away from a $500,000 property because of fines. Sarah hung up. She spent the next week in a fog of rage so pure and refined it felt almost meditative. She didn't eat much. She worked from home, staring at her backyard, at the shed with her father's tools inside it, at the perfectly maintained lawn that was never quite perfect enough for a woman who used architectural standards as a weapon. Then on a Tuesday morning, she found the letter. It was from Victoria, printed on personal stationery that probably cost more per sheet than Sarah's entire utility bill. It was handwritten, Victoria's contribution to pseudo-warmth. Dear Mrs. Chen, I've been reflecting on our situation, and I believe there may be a path forward that benefits us both. The board's enforcement action is regrettable but necessary. However, I wonder if we might discuss this more personally. I'm hosting a small gathering this Saturday at my home. I'd very much like you to attend. Perhaps over cocktails we can find common ground. You're a professional woman, I'm a professional woman. Surely we can reach an understanding. The address is listed below, 7 p.m. Warmly, Victoria. Sarah read it 3 times, trying to parse the subtext. Was this an olive branch? Was this Victoria attempting to separate Sarah from the violation case by making it personal? Was this a threat masquerading as hospitality? She decided to go. Sarah's friend Keisha, who worked in HR and understood workplace power dynamics, drove to the Ashford residence with her. The home was architectural magazine worthy, a modern colonial with columns you didn't actually need, set back from the street on an immaculately landscaped quarter-acre. The driveway had room for 8 cars. Only 3 were present. A Bentley Continental in pearl white, the same car from Sarah's hook, a Range Rover in gunmetal gray, and a Porsche so aggressively red it looked like a threat. Holy shit, Keisha whispered. The inside was worse. All open floor plans and designer furniture arranged to maximize sightlines, art that probably had a provenance, lighting that must have cost thousands to calibrate. Victoria was waiting, wearing a navy dress that probably cost more than Sarah's car payment, holding a champagne flute with practiced grace. Sarah, you came, she air-kissed both of Sarah's cheeks. And who is this? Keisha, my friend, I didn't want to come alone. Victoria's smile didn't flicker, but something behind her eyes hardened slightly. Of course, the more the merrier. The gathering was 12 people, all from the neighborhood's upper tier. Men in golf shirts that cost $400, women in jewelry that could fund small countries. They had the particular kind of confidence that came from inheriting money or marrying it or creating it without struggling. They looked at Sarah and Keisha with the special curiosity usually reserved for exhibit animals at a zoo. For 20 minutes, Victoria worked the room, leaving Sarah standing with a glass of wine she didn't drink. Then Victoria returned, touching Sarah's arm lightly. "Walk with me, I want to show you the lanai." The lanai was the size of Sarah's first apartment, open on 3 sides, with a sauna tucked into one corner and a hidden speaker system playing some kind of ambient meditation music. It was genuinely impressive in an empty way. "I wanted you to see this," Victoria said, "because I want you to understand what this neighborhood is for. It's for people like us, people who have worked hard, achieved success, and want to live somewhere that reflects that achievement. The properties here are investments. Your shed, your yard, the way you maintain or don't maintain your home, it affects everyone." "My property values are down," Sarah said quietly. "I checked. They've been down for 2 years. You've been down for 2 years. The whole neighborhood has been down. My shed isn't causing that." "No," Victoria agreed. "But it doesn't help. And you know what else doesn't help? Defiance. Refusing to comply, making everything difficult, forcing the board into litigation. That's not community. That's hostility. I removed nothing that justified the violation in the first place." "I think you're being dishonest," Victoria said, not unkindly. "I think you know this place has rules and you resent having to follow them. You work in construction, you understand contracts and compliance. But with your own home, you want to do what you want and you expect everyone else to accommodate that. I think you targeted me because I'm quiet and alone and wouldn't fight back as hard as someone else would." Victoria smiled. It was a genuine smile, almost sad. "I targeted you because you're the kind of person who needs to learn that not everything can be negotiated. Some people in this world respond to hierarchy, to clarity, to someone else making decisions for them. It's not cruel, it's necessary. It's how communities function. By having someone like you decide what everyone else is allowed to have. By having shared standards that everyone agrees to uphold." Victoria's voice was still patient, almost maternal. "You agreed to this covenant when you bought here, not because of me, because you understood this was the kind of neighborhood you wanted. Now you're changing the rules retroactively because you don't like the enforcement. That's not reasonable, Sarah. Neither is threatening my home over a shed. We're not threatening anything. We're enforcing the rules you agreed to. There's a difference." They stood in silence for a moment, the ambient meditation music playing softly, the pool glowing in the darkening evening. "I want to make you an offer," Victoria said finally. "Remove the shed by the end of the month. Pay half the accumulated fines. We'll call the rest a community reinvestment fee that goes toward landscaping. In exchange, the violations end. We move on. You remain part of the community in good standing. And if I don't?" Then the lien proceedings continue. We see it through to its logical conclusion. Your credit suffers. Your property value becomes even more uncertain. Eventually, you'll have to sell, and whoever buys will buy at a loss. That's not a threat. It's mathematics. Sarah understood then. Victoria wasn't trying to be cruel. That would have been easier to fight. Instead, she was being logical, efficient, and absolutely certain of her position's inevitability. This was how power worked when you had enough of it, not through drama, but through steady, patient application of the rules. Sarah didn't make a decision for 2 weeks. Instead, she did something that surprised her. She called her father's oldest friend, a man named Robert Chen, no relation, who'd been her father's business partner in a small construction company before his death. Robert was in his 70s now, still robust, still working, still had access to equipment. They met for lunch at a diner that hadn't changed since 1987, which was part of its charm. "So let me get this straight," Robert said, working through a pastrami sandwich. "The HOA is trying to force you to remove equipment that belonged to your father, and they're threatening to put a lien on your house if you don't comply." "That's the simplified version, yes. And they want you to pay thousands in fines for the privilege. Half of them, according to their latest offer." Robert chewed thoughtfully. "Your father would have hated this. He had the absolute strongest opinion about people telling him what to do with his own property." "He did. He told me once, I must have been 30 at the time, just starting out. He said that the moment you hand over control of something like that, you've already lost. You've accepted that someone else gets to decide what you're allowed to have." Robert took a sip of coffee. He was talking about zoning laws, actually, but it applies here too. "What would he have done?" Robert smiled. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of someone remembering a moment of beautiful defiance. "He would have done something dramatic and legal," Robert said. He would have found a way to make his point without breaking the law, but he would have made sure everyone understood exactly what the point was. How? I don't know, but I know someone who might. Robert had a connection, a lawyer named Tom Hernandez who specialized in HOA disputes and actually had a history of winning unusual cases. Sarah met with him on a Friday afternoon in an office that smelled like old paper and determination. Tom listened to the entire story without interrupting. When Sarah finished, he leaned back in his chair and steepled his fingers. "Here's what I'm seeing," Tom said. "The HOA has enforcement authority, but that authority doesn't include the right to harassment or selective enforcement. You documented multiple violations of other properties that haven't been cited. That's the wedge. The lawyer I consulted before said the violations were procedurally legal. Legal, but not necessarily defensible. If we can show a pattern of selective enforcement based on personal animus rather than architectural standards, we've got a case. More importantly, we've got leverage." "What kind of leverage?" Tom smiled. "The kind that comes from threatening to make noise. These HOAs hate publicity. They hate lawsuits. They especially hate the idea of being exposed as petty tyrants in a local news story. If we file a counterclaim against the lien proceedings, alleging selective enforcement and harassment, and we make it clear that we're prepared to take this public if necessary, they'll fold. Victoria Ashford doesn't want her neighborhood on the news." "What's the cost?" $3,000 retainer. Another 3 if we go to litigation, which we probably won't need to. Sarah thought about it. $6,000 to fight back. $6,000 to potentially lose her home and credit. The math was actually simple. "Do it," she said. Tom filed the counterclaim on Monday morning. By Tuesday afternoon, he received a call from the HOA's attorney, expressing surprise at the litigation and requesting an expedited settlement conference. By Wednesday, they had a meeting scheduled. Tom coached Sarah extensively. "Let me do the talking. You're there to show that this is serious, that you're not some isolated homeowner they can steamroll. Your presence is the message." The meeting was held in a conference room at the HOA's counsel's office, a sterile space with a long table and windows overlooking a parking lot. Victoria didn't attend. Derek Hayes was there, looking uncomfortable. Margaret Wu was there, looking relieved that it had come to this. The HOA's counsel was a woman named Patricia Schroeder, expensive haircut, expensive suit, expensive skepticism. Tom laid out the case methodically. He presented photographs of 12 other violations that hadn't been cited. He presented the timeline of Sarah's violations, showing an escalation that matched exactly with Victoria's personal conflicts. He presented expert testimony, via declaration, suggesting that architectural standards as enforced by the HOA were not actually being applied uniformly. "What this looks like," Tom concluded, "is harassment under the guise of enforcement. My client is prepared to move forward with litigation, and frankly, she's prepared to discuss this with local media. Nobody wins there, especially your client." Patricia Schroeder said nothing for nearly a minute. "I'll need to discuss this with Victoria Ashford," Patricia finally said. "Please do," Tom replied. "And let her know that if Mrs. Chen's name appears on any violation notice in the future, we'll file a harassment suit for damages." They walked out 2 hours later. Tom got the call on Friday. The HOA would be withdrawing the violation notice, dismissing the lien proceedings, and refunding half of the accumulated fines. In exchange, Sarah would simply have to maintain the shed in its current condition and agree not to pursue litigation against the HOA or its board members. "You win," Tom said over the phone. Sarah should have felt relief. Instead, she felt something stranger. She felt the beginning of something darker. Because Victoria Ashford didn't lose, people like Victoria Ashford didn't simply accept defeat. They adjusted strategy. The realization came in the form of a project proposal circulated by the HOA's Architectural Committee. A new community beautification initiative, complete removal and landscaping of all accessory structures in the neighborhood that didn't meet updated standards. The updated standards had suddenly become quite stringent. The proposal would require the removal of the majority of sheds, garden structures, and utility buildings. The vote was scheduled for 2 weeks out. Sarah understood what was happening. Victoria couldn't legally target her anymore, but she could change the rules for everyone, and in doing so, make Sarah's defiance not defiance but obstruction. The shed would have to come down eventually anyway, just under the guise of community improvement rather than personal violation. It was elegant, it was also a bridge too far. That night Sarah sat in her backyard looking at the shed in moonlight. Inside it her father's tools, his vise, his sander, his memory. She thought about Victoria's words. The moment you hand over control of something like that, you've already lost. She pulled out her phone and called Robert. "I need your help with something," she said. "And I need you to understand that it's going to be dramatic, it's going to be public, and it's probably going to be the kind of thing people talk about for a while." The neighborhood noticed things happening on Sarah's property on a Saturday morning. First came the delivery trucks, a flatbed with heavy equipment strapped down, then a dump truck, then a pair of smaller work vehicles with company logos neither vehicle had seen before. By 8 a.m., there was a heavy piece of machinery on Sarah's front lawn, a John Deere tractor with a front-end loader attachment and a grading blade. It was the size of a small house, emerald green, gleaming in the morning sunlight. Robert had helped her research, had connected her with his own contacts in heavy equipment. The rental was legal. The property was residential, which meant she could rent heavy equipment and, technically, use it for property maintenance. She wasn't violating any covenant by having the machinery there. But what she did with it, that was the legal gray area everyone would focus on. By 9 a.m., neighbors were standing in their driveways, confused. By 10 a.m., Victoria had called the HOA's council. By 11 a.m., Sarah was sitting in the cab of the tractor, engine off, eating a sandwich and waiting. She didn't have to wait long. Victoria arrived in the Bentley, parking directly in front of Sarah's property. She got out walking fast, her white linen less crisp than usual, her face flushed. "What is this?" Victoria demanded. Sarah climbed down from the tractor with deliberate slowness. She was wearing work boots, work jeans, a t-shirt with her company logo. She looked like she'd done physical labor. That was important. "Lot maintenance," Sarah said. "I'm planning to do some grading and land preparation in the back. The equipment should be here for about 2 weeks." "You can't have this here. It's a visual disturbance. It violates our community standards." "Actually, I checked with the county. Heavy equipment for property maintenance falls under agricultural exemptions for residential use. I can keep it here as long as I need it." Victoria's face went a particular shade of red that suggested she'd been holding a lot in. "You're doing this deliberately. You're deliberately creating a problem." "I'm doing what you do," Sarah said calmly. "I'm changing the rules when they don't work for me. You change them for everyone to remove my shed. I'm changing them for myself to keep it. Seems fair." "This is not fair. This is malice." "Then we have something in common." Victoria turned away, pulling out her phone. Sarah could hear her on the call to Patricia Schroeder. "She's brought in heavy equipment. I don't care if it's technically legal. I want an emergency board meeting. Yes, today." Sarah went back to eating her sandwich. The emergency board meeting was called for 4 p.m. Sarah attended. The conference room was packed now, not just board members and residents, but apparently several HOA neighbors who'd heard about the situation and came for the spectacle. Patricia Schroeder, the HOA's counsel, laid out the situation. While Mrs. Chen is technically within her rights to place heavy equipment on her property for maintenance purposes, the board may be able to argue that the intent is disruptive rather than functional. Further, if Mrs. Chen attempts to use this equipment in a way that violates covenant standards. "I'm only using it for lot maintenance," Sarah interrupted, "which is explicitly allowed under county agricultural exemptions." "What kind of lot maintenance requires heavy machinery?" Derek Hayes asked, and Sarah could see he was already enjoying the performance aspects of this conflict. "Grading, drainage improvement, land preparation." "For what?" Victoria's voice was tight. Sarah smiled. "That's the beautiful part. I haven't decided yet, might leave it as is, might do the grading, might have some ideas about what the land could be used for." "You're not selling," Margaret Wu said. "It wasn't a question." "I own the property. I'm not going anywhere." Patricia Schroeder was making notes. "I'll need to review the specific exemptions and the deed covenants. But technically, if Mrs. Chen is using equipment for legitimate property maintenance, and the equipment itself is removed within a reasonable time frame." "What's reasonable?" Victoria asked sharply. "Generally 2 to 6 weeks for equipment rental." So we're just supposed to live with this monstrosity looming over the neighborhood. Unless Mrs. Chen is violating specific covenant language regarding the nature of that maintenance, yes. Victoria stood up. This is exactly what I was talking about. This is the problem with people who don't understand community. She's more interested in making a point than being part of something larger than herself. Sarah stood too. I understand community fine. What I don't understand is the idea that community only works when everyone else does what you want. Your community is a dictatorship. I'm just making that visible. The room went silent. These were words people thought but didn't say in whispering pines. These were words that violated the deeper covenant, the unspoken agreement to maintain polite fiction. This meeting is adjourned, Patricia said. Mrs. Chen, keep that equipment functional and on your property. Any use that violates the deed covenants will be prosecuted. Everyone else, Mrs. Ashford, the board will discuss next steps in executive session. The tractor stayed for 3 weeks. Nothing happened. Sarah didn't grade, she didn't dig, she didn't use it for anything functional. It just sat on her front lawn, a bright green monument to defiance, increasingly irksome to everyone who drove past. On the first day, she got 3 violation notices, one for the tractor's presence, one for storage of industrial equipment, one for aesthetic disruption. Tom had them dismissed within hours. The HOA tried again with equipment vibration complaints from neighbors. That was fiction, but the HOA filed the complaint anyway. Tom threatened to sue for harassment, and they stopped. But something else happened. The neighborhood split. Residents began talking. People Sarah had never spoken to started conversations. Margaret Wu invited her to coffee and asked if she wanted to file a complaint about Victoria's selective enforcement. A man 2 streets over mentioned that Victoria had been attempting to force him to remove a deck that his contractor had assured him was perfectly legal. A couple at the end of the street revealed that Victoria had been telling people Sarah's property was bringing down values, which they'd never believed, particularly given their own recent appraisal. The quiet people, the ones who complied and paid their dues and tried not to make waves, started asking questions. They started wondering if the tractor thing was really a problem or if it was just Victoria's problem. More importantly, they started wondering if Victoria had been right about anything. The HOA called another meeting in week 3, this time to discuss the community beautification project that would remove all non-compliant accessory structures. Margaret Wu, apparently emboldened by the neighbors' shifting sentiment, moved to table the discussion indefinitely. Derek Hayes seconded immediately. Sarah later realized he'd never actually cared about the project itself, only about not looking stupid. Victoria was outvoted 3-1, with only Patricia Schroeder, the council, not technically a voting member, supporting the motion. The beautification project was dead. But Victoria wasn't done. She was furious in a way that transcended the situation itself. This wasn't about architecture anymore. This was about the universe not conforming to her expectations, and she was going to make things right. On the morning that Sarah was supposed to return the tractor, Victoria did something genuinely stupid. She parked her Bentley directly behind it. The tractor occupied most of Sarah's front lawn, angled with the loader facing forward and the back end extending toward the property line. To return it, the rental company needed to back it out to the street using a specific route. Victoria's Bentley, pearl white and pristine, was positioned exactly in that route. Sarah received a text from Robert, who'd arrived with the rental company. "She's blocking the exit. This is deliberate." Sarah got dressed, went outside, and found Victoria standing on her own lawn, arms crossed, sunglasses on despite the overcast morning. "You're blocking the rental company's access," Sarah said calmly. "Then move your obscene machinery," Victoria replied. "Move it right now." "It's scheduled to be removed this morning. Your car is preventing that." Perhaps that's the point. Sarah understood then. Victoria wanted confrontation. She wanted violence or legal action or something that would prove Sarah was the bad actor in this narrative. Sarah was not going to give her that. "I'm calling the police," Sarah said. "For what? It's my car on my property." "To report that you're obstructing access for commercial equipment. It's technically illegal." "Then call," Victoria said. "Let them explain to the police how you've been deliberately harassing this neighborhood with massive machinery for weeks." Sarah took a breath. She realized, about to do something that would define how this entire situation ended. She could accept the blockade, delay the tractor removal, give Victoria leverage, or she could proceed. She called 911. The police arrived 20 minutes later, two officers, utterly unenthusiastic about the situation. After Sarah explained, one of them approached Victoria. "Ma'am, you'll need to move your vehicle." "No," Victoria said, "it's my property. It's obstructing access for commercial equipment removal. Move the vehicle or I'll have it towed." For the first time, Victoria looked uncertain. The officer wasn't negotiating. He wasn't being charmed. He was just going to resolve the situation through force of law. "This is absurd," Victoria said. "Yes, ma'am, it is. Move the car." Victoria moved the car, screeching tires on asphalt, her face a color Sarah had never seen before. The tractor was backed out of the lot by 8:45 a.m. By 9, it was gone. But something essential had shifted. Victoria had lost the performance. The neighbors had seen her car being moved by police. They'd seen her lose her composure. They'd seen someone they'd collectively accepted as a community leader reduced to someone whose dramatic gestures had ended in a tow truck threat. Margaret Wu called Sarah that afternoon. "I'm resigning from the board," she said. "Effective immediately. Victoria's turning this into something toxic and I won't be part of it." The following month, Derek Hayes abstained from the board vote to censure Sarah for creating community disruption. Patricia Schroeder recommended against further legal action, citing ambiguous legal precedent and potential reputation damage. By month 6, the HOA had essentially abandoned Victoria's enforcement agenda. But the victory was complicated because Sarah was discovering something unpleasant about herself. She liked winning. She liked watching Victoria's face when things didn't go according to plan. She liked the power of knowing that she'd held her position and the system had bent instead. More concerning, she was starting to understand how Victoria had become who she was. All Victoria had ever done was hold her position. And eventually, holding your position feels like winning. And eventually, winning feels like being right. And eventually, being right feels like being superior. And by the time you notice that transformation, you're the person creating tractor drama to protect a power dynamic. Sarah realized she needed to stop. She called Robert, she called Tom, she called Victoria. Victoria's voice was glacial when she answered. "What?" "I want to end this," Sarah said. "You don't get to decide when it ends." "Actually, I do. I'm offering you an out. I want to remove the shed. I'm going to do it in the next 2 weeks. I won't pursue any legal action. I won't talk to the press about what happened. I'll be a compliant community member, and you're going to accept it, and we're both going to move on with our lives." "Why would you do that?" "Because I started to become you, and I didn't like it." There was a long silence on the line. "You're weak," Victoria finally said. "Probably," Sarah agreed. "But at least I'm going to stop before I hurt people over a mailbox post." The shed came down on a Tuesday. Sarah did it herself with Robert's help, carefully removing each board, cataloging her father's tools, deciding what to keep and what to donate. The process took 3 days. By the end, the lot was cleared, the grass underneath pale and shocked at exposure. The violation notices stopped. The HOA held regular meetings, and Sarah occasionally attended but mostly didn't. The neighborhood settled into a new equilibrium, quieter, less theatrical, infinitely more boring. Victoria sold her house 6 months later. The listing price was $950,000. It sold for $875,000 to a family with 3 children and a remarkably unconcerned attitude toward shed placement. Victoria bought a condo in a gated community with a professional HOA management company, where the rules were enforced by staff rather than neighbors, and the emotional stakes were considerably lower. Sarah ran into Margaret Wu at a coffee shop 3 months after Victoria moved. They had a real conversation about neighborhood politics, about how institutions work when no one's watching them, about the particular danger of systems that reward consistency over wisdom. "Victoria believed what she was doing was necessary," Margaret said. "That's what scared me. She wasn't being cruel for cruelty's sake. She genuinely thought the neighborhood would collapse without her enforcement." "Do you think it would have?" Sarah asked. "No, I think neighborhoods survive chaos better than they survive control. People are actually pretty reasonable if you let them be." Sarah thought about that conversation often. She thought about it when she got a promotion at work, when she started dating someone she genuinely liked, when she painted her front door a different color, something she would have been terrified to do a year earlier, and nobody filed a violation notice. The neighborhood adapted. Without Victoria's constant enforcement, people revealed themselves to have actual opinions about aesthetics. Some properties became messier. Some became more beautiful. The covenant was still there, technically, but without Victoria's will to enforce it, it became more like a suggestion than a law. One afternoon, 6 months after Victoria's departure, Sarah was working in her yard when the new homeowner 2 streets over, Victoria's replacement, appeared at her property line with his eldest child, a daughter about 8 years old. "We're building a fort," the man said. "In the backyard, my daughter wants to know if you have any tips for construction." Sarah looked at the child's excited face, at the empty lot ready for disorder and play, and all the things that real community is actually made of. "Actually," Sarah said, "I might have some tools I can lend you. Let me show you." She walked them back to the storage space where she'd kept her father's equipment. She showed the daughter how to use the tape measure, how to read a basic blueprint, how to think about structure and safety. She gave them the tools. She gave them permission, more importantly, to build something that didn't need to fit anyone else's aesthetic. The fort was chaotic and beautiful and completely non-compliant with any reasonable architectural standard. Sarah watched it go up over 2 weeks, watched the neighborhood children playing in it, watched something like joy happening on a property where joy had been systematically eliminated by committee. One evening, the man brought his daughter back to return the tools. The girl was holding a drawing. "This is our fort," she said, showing Sarah. "My dad says you helped us build something that matters." Sarah kept the drawing, she framed it, she hung it in her office. Below it, she kept the folder of violation notices, all $12,150 worth of them. Not as a trophy, but as a reminder of how quickly a person can become unrecognizable to themselves if they're not careful. How easily control can feel like righteousness. How a war over a shed is really a war about the size of a person's self and whether they're big enough to admit mistake and small enough to change. 3 years later, Sarah was visiting her parents' graves, a marker for her mother, a marker for her father, and she thought about what Robert had said. Your father would have done something dramatic and legal. She realized, standing there in the cemetery, that the dramatic thing wasn't the tractor. The dramatic thing was knowing when to stop. That was the hardest resistance of all, not to a system, but to your own need to prove you were right.